Now, I want to introduce my special guest today, Taylor Ryan, founder and CEO of Clint Marketing. Hey, Taylor.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'll now hand it over to Taylor, who will give you some practical tips on growing your business using competitive insights, particularly around using tools like similarweb. So over to you, Taylor.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks very much. And I hope everything works out for Steve. I'm really excited to be here. I move super fast. I'm trying to cover a lot of material, but let's dive in. So thank you for the intro. My name is Taylor Ryan. I run Clint and growthsecrets.org. 14 years of marketing experience. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I've spent the last 6 years in Copenhagen, Denmark. I almost said sunny Copenhagen, Denmark. It's a little kind of in and out today. I'm a 6-time startup founder. I work with tons of small, medium, and large organizations in Europe and North America. In terms of some of my things that I guess it would be interesting to note in the track record, not a lot of Americans are probably familiar with these companies, but I have built the marketing from zero for 4 companies that have basically exited, which is a fancy word for got bought out, which is a good thing in the startup scene. So 1 IPO, 2 acquisitions, 1 merger. And a lot of the stuff that I've done has been directly related to competitor analysis and using a bit of growth hacking kind of mixed in. So my company is called Clint. I've already touched upon Growth Secrets as well. It's my online masterclass. Feel free to check it out, growthsecrets.org. I want to give people enough information today to be able to see the similar traffic patterns that you see within some of my previous projects. And my goal is to create value. So hopefully there's either a tool, a trick, or some type of tactic that resonates with the people here, because I assume that's why you're here, is trying to gain an edge. There's something within competitor analysis that must be interesting to you, either because they're overtaking you or there's lots of opportunities in front of you. Maybe you have a budget to spend, so let's play ball. I did mention I move fast, and the reason for that is some of these slides are basically standalone. If you connect directly with me on LinkedIn, and you have to hit those 3 dots because now I have the creator mode profile that LinkedIn just released. So don't follow me, connect with me by hitting those 3 dots and then connect and add a note. That's the idea. I don't give my slides to direct competitors because, yeah, you got to work for it. So I'm going to cover a ton of different areas and I'm diving in, but let's just hit some of like the theory and the thought process. I showed this slide when I did a presentation in Stockholm. They're a little more conservative and traditional, and people were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. So one of the more interesting things that I see, especially when looking at competitors, is how it works in sports, in the wild. So there was this guy called Sean Avery who basically they had to create a new rule for him because in the 2008 Stanley Cup playoffs, he started this thing where he was distracting the goalie, hoping that his team would actually end up getting a game-winning goal out of it. And there was no rule on the books that said you couldn't do this. So between the game that they were currently playing and the next, they had to come up with a rule on the spot. You also see this with the guy who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss. Really awesome book if you haven't read it, where he went in and tried to figure out what sport could I gold medal in if I tried to take apart the simplest parts of it. And maybe if we're looking at maybe like Hollywood, Moneyball with Brad Pitt, they were applying data to something that data hadn't ever been applied before. And for other people that maybe watch football, the idea is you're actually looking at game film and trying to figure out what are the faults and weaknesses of the other team's strengths. Is there a playbook or a consistent play that is going to be something that they're going to use against me? Standard practices, best moves, etc. Before I dive into anything, I think it's kind of a big picture, because if I don't give this kind of big picture look, I think a lot of people might say, well, that's not the same for me. And it's like, yeah, I know. So every industry is going to be different naturally. And as that being the case, then every product is going to be different. And if that's also the case, then we're looking at every business model being different. So my advice might not be exactly perfect for you, but I imagine there's enough in here that the tools will definitely be relevant. I do think that a lot of using competitor analysis is not to outright steal or copy, even though I can show you how to do some of that stuff. It's learning how to build from an existing source. Where does this exist in the wild? And use it to your own advantage. So let's dive in. Exploring competitors is super important, and it's something that we all should be doing on a regular basis. It's one of the first things that I do when I get a new client. This allows me to take a look at everything from social media to their email flow. I always encourage my clients to sign up for their newsletter, or if it's a software as a service type platform, I ask them to actually convert not put money into obviously their competitors, but convert. And there's plenty of temporary email tools like temp mail. I use burner mail personally. That way I can see the entire flow for the first week to the first year potentially. And I get a lot of really interesting insights out of that, discovering exactly how they've built their funnel. This helps me to understand, oh, there's a skip in maybe my onboarding, or there's something that I totally missed with the way that I'm triggering the behavior basis for these different email campaigns that are going out once you convert. There's so many interesting takeaways that you can pull from that. From the standpoint of understanding exactly how much my competitors are doing across different channels, it allows me to start to understand if I take the industry averages and benchmarks across every step of their funnel, and I can see how much they're potentially spending or how much they're getting in organic traffic, I can give some sense of they're probably converting this many people monthly. Therefore, those are my benchmarks to attack or hopefully meet them halfway. And that's kind of the big idea, is like, what is the person on the other side of the aisle doing that I can compete with? So building a list of competitors, super easy. I do this with every one of my clients, and it's really fast. The most important things are listed here. So company name, company URL, blog URL, and I'll show some of the reasons why, some social media channels, and some insights that we can build off of. So these insights are super important, and every single bullet point here is a different project that allows us to dive super deep into all of our competitors in order to get inspiration on some sort of level, whether it's content or PR or whatever the case is. So I'm going to dive into some of these because I think it's really helpful. The first stage of finding competitors is the manual stuff. It's the the way my dad types, the finger point type. And the whole idea is I need just 2 or 3 to start with, something that's foundational that we all can agree these are direct competitors, and you should be aware of at least 2 or 3. We'll use these to build the rest. So this is a quick screenshot of SimilarWeb. Plop in the URL, and you should be able to find a handful of competitors. Usually it's based off of the organic traffic. So the idea is, great, let's put in whatever we get out of that. So we export all of the competitors, and we just repeat and repeat and repeat and continue until we have dozens, if not hundreds of competitors. At which case, I'm breaking up my competitors into my core competitors. These are the people that are like competitors, direct. Then I have feature competitors where it's like, almost, not quite. And then industry competitors. And I could also put publishers in here because they are competing in terms of attention and eyes on content. So moving right along, there are many different tools that allow you to get a different glimpse into competitors. No tool is the one size fits all or perfection. I always mix and match, and it's something that you should consider doing as well. If I can't find all my competitors by using these tools, or I'm in this really early space, but maybe you're touching something to do with SaaS, then go ahead and use one of the SaaS listing sites to be able to find all the competitors of either your competitors or your best customers, who knows. But this gives me a lot of interesting marketing insights to really go through and see how people are categorizing themselves, how they're talking about themselves. It's quite simple. So let's dive into competitor insights. A ton of different tools that you can pick up and use, and they are free. Wappalizer. I love getting on Wappalizer and seeing, oh, interesting, those guys are using HubSpot. So they're probably automating a lot of the inbound marketing, and I'm curious what behavior triggers they're sending after people convert. This gives me all kinds of interesting ideas and figuring out exactly where their gaps are, or getting inspiration and saying, I really like the first delivery of this narrative approach to their newsletter. I can steal my competitors' happiest and best customers if I try hard enough. It's an interesting tactic, and it depends on where you are on a moral spectrum. But if you are looking at your competitor's website and they're listing logos of people that aren't too far down the road, you should reach out to them and say, hey, you still working with those guys? I got to tell you, we have a better product. And for the price point, and I'm happy to actually take a loss on this, I'd like to see you get a better experience overall. And you'd be surprised, you reach out to enough happy people that have put down some form of testimonial online that are open to actually leaving what they've been using for the last year, month, day, who knows. So it's a really interesting technique to basically go through and manually pull companies off. The other way to do this is a bit more automated. BuiltWith is probably one of the more standard tools, but SimilarTech is actually owned by SimilarWeb, so it's all the same stuff. But you can find out what is the tech stack behind the tool. So I'm either able to figure out what integrates with my competitors, or what integrates with the things that I integrate, or potentially competitors of my customers, which is an interesting tactic. But I think my new favorite tool within this mix is public, www.com. You see a lot of interesting things. You can plug in anything that comes out of a tech stack. Super cool. I can also scrape competitors, and I've done this with a lot of clients off of Google reviews, Trustpilot, Yelp, but also if it's a software as a service company, SaaS, you can also go through and scrape all the SaaS review listings. And in many cases, you get the first name and company, which is quite interesting. I've found, especially in the US, it's weird. I'm, again, out in the Nordics, they're not big on Twitter, but with some of my US clients, I have been able to find frustrated customers or happy customers and do some form of DMing and outreaching, or even enriching those in order to find their LinkedIn profile or even their company email address and be able to say, hey, sorry you had such a bad experience with insert the name of a competitor. Why don't we talk about this over a call and I can understand maybe a little bit more about your challenges as a company. There's also a ton of interesting free social listening sites. The tool's called Social Searcher. I think it's fascinating. You plug in either your brand name or a benefit or some of the features or even your industry, and you'll start to see some of these conversations taking place. There's a freemium version of that. I cannot recommend it enough. I think it's fantastic. And these different ways of garnishing different kind of competitors in different buckets allows me to create custom audiences within LinkedIn. And there's a ton of different campaigns that I can run against either my competitors' best customers or worst customers, but lots of different ways to do it. So traffic analysis is something I do on a regular basis. Kind of reminds me of Forrest Gump, like you could tell a lot by a person by their shoes. The whole idea has such a bad impression. Like, take that off the webinar. But I love the way it's looking at traffic because I immediately get a feel for how people are actually doing in terms of digital marketing. So if I see that somebody has pretty strong branding and brand recognition, they got a ton of direct traffic. If their email marketing is on point and they're doing a bit of partnerships and affiliate marketing, that goes up. If they have a really strong PR department or PR play, I can see that they're getting a ton of referral traffic. Or sometimes it's just kind of luck and happenstance. If there's a lot on social media, in many cases it means paid social media, or they're doing some really amazing things with pushing out lots of content there. Organic is what I really focus on because that means they actually know how to do digital marketing, and it's getting more difficult. And with paid, it at least indicates to me I might be able to steal something interesting. So ranking top competitors, I tend to do it by organic because it gives me the clearest indicator of how well a company is actually equipped to do digital marketing and whether or not I'm going to be able to compete with them. And those that are getting lots of traffic understand the game. I also like pulling apart the backlink profiles of different companies. This gives me all kinds of inspiration for where I can go about getting guest posts because, hey, if you posted an article by those guys, you're going to love me. Or if I need to find somebody else that is in the field of like partnerships or some type of community building, I'm going to reach out to people that are listing alongside my competitors and say, hey, I want to get on that list. How do I get involved in the top 5 companies to do X, Y, and Z? There's lots of different ways to play this. I do think the broken links route is super interesting when they're linking to links that are no longer there. I could go on to this stuff for hours, but I'm going to move on. So the skyscraper technique I think it's pretty commonplace. It's been around for a while, but it's interesting because I often tell people about it and it's like a surprise. So this term was coined by Brian Dean of Backlinko. I don't know, he doesn't need a lot more traffic. He's doing quite fine, but I do think he has a great blog, so backlinko.com. And he coined this phrase, which basically has this cute story behind it. So in the old days in New York City, due to the confines of engineering, you could only build a building up to about 90 floors. So somebody, they thought to put a flagpole on top of their building. And it was the tallest building in all of New York City for a very brief period of time. After that, somebody put up just a taller version of a flagpole, and all of a sudden they had the tallest building in all of New York. We can do this with content. I can create a longer, more detailed, more optimized version of the article that is drawing in sometimes 30, 40, 50% of their total traffic. And it's like taking the best player on the opposing team and getting them to play for you. I do this with all my clients. I've done this historically with every company that I've run as a chief marketing officer. It's one of my favorite tactics in terms of content marketing. The way that I go about finding the best pieces of content is to organize the top pages and run down by something that has to be more than 250 keywords. If you're not hitting the mark of 1,000, it's probably not worth my time, but every industry is different. I've worked with industries that are very niche and there's not a lot of content out there, which is good and bad, but it just depends. I start to break down, and this is where I get super granular, but I start to break down what the results are by the core pages, which usually is kind of solution-related keywords. Then I'll go into general articles and blogs. Then I'll have resources and kind of an other section. which then gives me a really defined look at the best content within all of my industry, regardless of whether they're a publisher or a direct competitor. At which case, if somebody saunters over from sales and says, hey, I got a great idea for an article, it's like, thanks, Bobby, we're all set. We have tons of articles waiting to be written because we know that we have a very high likelihood of being able to grab a ton of traffic if we do a halfway decent job at making a longer, more detailed, more interesting version of that article. So competitor keywords, I love to jam out on this stuff. I think it's so fascinating in the way that keywords continue to kind of ebb and flow depending on the age and the different algorithms that are out there. A lot of localization and a lot of changes more recently, but I digress. So one of the things that I often look for in competitors is if they do not have a minimum of 1,000 keywords, they're just not quite there yet. Maybe one day they will be. Most of my competitors, the ones that I take seriously, are upwards of 3,000. That means somebody within the marketing department has done something right. There's some competencies there, which means there's probably some gold if you try to fish for it. So I'll export all of those and put them into a really nice structure. I'll rip out the keywords that I think are the highest intent, and I break them down by something that defines the company, functionality. Industry buzzwords are kind of stuff that everybody says, but if you weren't in that industry, you wouldn't know. Features and benefits, and I'll avoid stuff that's, low search volume, low click-through rates, and just stuff that's like way too competitive. And then after that, I want to start to cluster the keywords together. So this kind of allows me to continue to build up more and more keywords around these core pillars, or as I call them, kind of the keyword universe and the main phrases that I want to really build upon. What I end up with is a very clear clustering of different keywords that I can either go after in terms of Google Ads or potentially look at whether or not I want to optimize specific pages for organic. And if I'm really trying to make things interesting, I can certainly sort them all by keyword difficulty or all by search volume to know these are the most powerful keywords within my entire industry. I realize I'm running low on time, which is part of the jam here, and I'm gonna fast forward through a couple of quick things. I think website architecture is fascinating, and if you are doing keyword research this way, it's very easy to put everything into buckets so that you know these are the keywords that I'm optimizing for on these pages. The only thing that I will say about that is do not put the same keyword that you're optimizing for on one page on another, because it turns into keyword cannibalization. I think I got maybe another minute here, so I'm just really quickly going to run through this because it's one of my favorite areas. So competitor ads, in terms of getting inspiration, this is one of the easiest things that you can do to immediately scale. If one of my competitors has been running the same ad for more than 3 months, either they have the worst person inside of marketing working in their marketing department who is just burning money, or it means the ad is working. And I often export all the ads from all the competitors, and you can do that within similarweb. And the idea is I break them down and structure them within verticals. So you have pain and brand and value-based and technology-based. This is a version of what you could pull off of LinkedIn, which is out of order. Or I'll use AdBeats or BigSpy to basically get a really cool narrative of when the ad started and when they stopped, or if they're still going. And again, if I know an ad has been live for more than 3 months, it means this has been generating enough revenue for them in order for them to keep it live. Therefore, you should make a really more interesting version of it that probably will convert more customers that would have gone to your competitors. So I realize I'm pretty much out of time here, so I am happy to jam out at a different point, but I think there's always more stuff to go into, and you could do this for social media, and there's so many other tools. But my name is Taylor Ryan. We've covered a lot of different areas. I run growthsecrets.org, where I teach all of this stuff. I'm pricing it out at $49 because, I hate the idea of people selling courses for ridiculous amounts of money. And I run Clint, which is a digital marketing and growth hacking agency. And that's it for me today. I hope that was interesting.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yes, so many tips. It was so jam-packed. So we are recording this, so you can go back and rewatch it at any point, and obviously hit up Taylor, as he said, through his LinkedIn. If there was something I learned, something new, there was some I thought what was really interesting is how you're extracting all the data as well, and then building your own world, I guess, through just a fancy spreadsheet. I mean, that's how you get things done. It's amazing. And before we wrap up, I wanted to also come back to Steve. It looks like he's delivered a winning strategy there, and based on the competitive insights he delivered earlier. So well done, Steve. And that really just wraps us up, I guess, for the session. If you want to learn more, we've got a competitive analysis playbook that you can download. You can also get in contact with anyone for a demo, or even try it yourself and just sign up for the trial. But Jeremy, I'm really curious to learn about those poll questions and what was the top answer there?
Yeah. Let me get to those results. First, let me thank both of you for sharing your insights with us. I often, I feel like, oh, can I really get anything out of this webinar? In this case, I definitely did, and I'm going to be rewatching this. But let's get to those poll results. We asked our audience, how do you currently track your competitors? 31% said it was through product and pricing, 25% through sales tactics and results, 16% said SWOT analysis, another 16% said social media performance, and 13% said audience engagement and loyalty. Quick take on those results, both of you. What do you think about that?
Chloe?
Yeah, so I thought product and pricing actually surprised me as one of the first areas. I was tipping social media because it's one area that you can obviously see your competitors very quickly and see all the social chatter and the SWOT analysis. So that probably tells me a lot about the marketers in the room, which makes me as a product marketer even more excited to be here because it sounds like I'm with the right people. But Taylor, tell me, what do you think of the results?
Yeah, it sounds like a fairly even distribution, or like kind of a nice curve. I think it always depends on what's happening like in the right moment right now. And if you're really focused in on, oh, we've lost all this traffic on social media, what happened? All of a sudden that becomes the most important thing that you can talk about. And therefore that's the only thing that we track. And I think if you check in on different people at different times of the year, you're going to get different answers. So it could just be a victim of circumstance, but yeah, I think polls are really interesting. You get a lot of insights from them, at least on a granular level.
And I know we want to get to those questions, right? We've got quite a few questions from our audience, so let's get straight to the Q&A. This might be best for Chloe. Larry in Cleveland is asking, what would you say is the most important step of competitive analysis and why?
Yeah, really good question, Larry. So we went through some of those key steps earlier to building that competitive strategy. And for me, it's all about mapping out your competitors. And Taylor talked a lot about that. And you can see how he takes it, those steps much further, I think. But it's also about getting that 30,000 foot view as well. And being able to then get deeper into the SWOT analysis and understand strengths, weaknesses, what are those opportunities and what are those threats, and really be able to get very granular in how your company fits into that. So I think that's the most important step here, is to evaluate your company's own strengths and weaknesses relative to your competitors, so that you can spot those opportunities and really position your company and its value proposition based on what what the positioning is of your other competitors. So this is why I would say that you need a lot of hard data to sort of back up those analysis, and you can make the right call. Because I think if you don't know what your competitor's doing online and what their strategy is and how it's working for them, you can literally be left in the dark and be very only focused on your what you're doing. And I do think that's important to be all in on your own company and your your key objectives, but also having that peripheral view, having that data to interpret and synthesize is really critical, particularly around the SWOT analysis step. I don't know if you have anything to add on top of that, Taylor?
No, I think that's very thorough. So no, I think you nailed it.
Cool.
Another really good one that we just got from Vicky in New York. This might be best for Taylor. What could a company learn by benchmarking against major industry players as opposed to benchmarking against their smaller, more niche competitors? And what are the benefits and pain points to each?
Cool. Yeah, that's a cool question. So, I think working at a big company, and I've never really had the luxury of having the giant budgets that these characters get to do. But, in many cases, you're getting to see a lot of tests take place that maybe were kind of ill-fated to begin with. But yeah, I've always found that going in and looking at either ads or some type of market spend, at which case I want to see if it works out for them. So it's like you're a live guinea pig that I get to kind of watch and see if it actually pans out. And I often do that, especially when it's market leaders, because I think they are investing a lot in order to stay up top. Whereas the challenger brand or the company that's trying to, I don't know, go from like number 10 to like number 5, I think they're a lot more strategic because they get to see the other mistakes that people make. So by and large, I get a lot of value out of looking at ads and understanding ad spend and where they're launching a lot of momentum, whether it's multi-lang pages or it's focusing on like content, or I don't know. There's so many different ways to look at it. But I hope that answers the question.
Makes complete sense. We have one from Eric in Dallas. This is a good one. Might be good for Taylor also possibly. What's going to happen to the digital stack tracking with iOS 14 and beyond and the changes to Google and Facebook's ecosystems?
It's the same thing that happened, and that's a cool question. I've been getting that a lot at events. I did a whole LinkedIn 2-hour session today for a big managed service provider company, and that came up multiple times as well. So like GDPR is this thing that exists out here, which basically doesn't allow you to hold on to data the same way. You can't blast a bunch of people with spam. And it's the future. I think we're ultimately going to get there globally. But the idea behind not having data doesn't necessarily give us an inability to continue to market. So some of the things that I think are going to be a bit more challenging is being able to show attribution. Attribution is where you're able to say with some level of certainty, this person came through this channel first and then this channel. If we don't have that level of data, then it's not there, which either means we have to get back to basics and sell and market and put a little more branding mix on it, or we have to find workarounds. And it's always been this cat and mouse game. You'll always see that, especially with growth hacking. So you'll have this window of opportunity that you can exploit this really cool tool or technique until it eventually closes. So there will be some form of tracking, just not as we know it right now. But I definitely see that as the future because data is what we all exist and use on a regular basis in order to scale. So I can't imagine people are like, like blind dartboard stuff. That ain't going to happen. So I think we'll just find different workarounds.
That's, it makes complete sense. And I think it is a period of transition, certainly for a lot of growth marketers. This might be a good one for Chloe. Darren in San Francisco is asking, what makes companies digitally mature today? And how can we track or measure the maturity of our competitors?
Yeah, so digital maturity, it's an interesting one, isn't it, in terms of a theme? I guess we've seen in the last 18 months, the scale of what digitally mature actually really means and that acceleration, because, that all a lot of businesses just like absolutely exploded online. As consumers, I think we kind of expect to be able to transact online, do our business, do our banking, be able to book appointments. And I think those companies that really recognize like where people are spending their time and money online means that they have more of a competitive advantage, that things they're already turning quite digital. And so I think it's even more now. So being able to recognize it is, the second part of that question is being able to track and measure that, like digital maturity. A lot of companies already see that. They already thought they already had it. But I think it's not actually always easy to track and measure because there's certain signals. such as, I mean, Taylor talked a lot about it actually. He sees that the type of investment where people are spending, you mentioned it earlier, looking at paid search, that demonstrates a certain level of digital maturity, whether they're doing those ads for 3 months. You know, he even talked about it earlier about, you know, they must be doing something really right in their marketing, or they're just burning money for 3 months for no reason. So I think they are some of the nuanced ways of recognizing that. Again, I'll bring it back to Taylor. He did a really good example. We talk about it a lot, is the direct traffic and brand building. And if a customer if you know your competitor's getting a lot of direct traffic, they have brand awareness, they're probably a market leader, which then demonstrates that they're a digitally mature company. But also, I think we also said, like, there's a lot of companies that are different levels of digital maturity, and you'd be amazed at the level of literacy between what do traffic and engagement metrics really mean for the bottom line as a business that has been in the same status quo for quite some time. There's a lot of education to be there. I can see Taylor's nodding his head, which is great, which is why you guys are here with us today, and why you obviously read the eMarketer as well, because there's so much content and resource. You know, the marketing world is just changing all the time. We all know that as marketers. We know that we can't learn absolutely everything about the beast that is marketing, but using obviously tools like similarweb helps you get ahead of the game.
Yep. Yeah, I think that it actually building on that, and I think that I love when the audience tees us up with some really good questions. Eric in St. Louis, another Eric, by the way. Maybe for Taylor, but feel free to weigh in, both of you. Where does total media spend, video, programmatic, streaming, play in the competitive landscape? How do we think about those two things together?
Interesting. Yeah, so I did a presentation for, you'll have to look it up. It was, sorry, I keep hitting the table. I'm all jazzed up. Yeah, I did a presentation. Basically, I was the last presenter to get invited to this because everybody passed on it, which was a social media ROI conference through Falcon. It's a posting tool. But yeah, nobody wanted to lay a finger on how you go about putting something together in terms of a budget, and then how do you go about budgeting across individual ad channels. And that is quite a big undertaking if you've never done it before. I think one of the hardest things is it's so specific to individual industries. If you do a quick Google search for Deloitte and the CMO survey, they have a couple of interesting charts in there that break down by industry and by whatever the business model is, so B2B versus B2C, product versus service. And you can see that some people are spending as low as 5% of their total revenue on marketing just as a whole, and other people are spending upwards of 25%, like consumer packaged goods spend 25% of their marketing budget, 25% of their total budget on marketing. And then you drill further down, and there's lots of little surveys that come out where people are giving you some indication of what they're spending just on digital ads. And I do think there's a lot of interesting takeaways from that. I would never, as a B2B company, try to go big on Facebook. I'd like to win on 1 or 2 channels first. I'd like to get a pretty good indication of how I would perform on those by doing a quick lookup. Depending on the type of campaign, if it's cost per 1,000 CPM, or if it's cost per click, then it's CPC. But if you Google search benchmarks and whatever the name of the platform is, you're going to find a lot of really interesting data. So I know that software as a service has usually a cost per click that's this much, and a cost per acquisition based off of all these other factors that I can look up online means I should spend about this much. Problem is, nobody wants to do that work, so it's a lot of finger in the air, and it's like, I don't know, we didn't want to spend 50,000, 30 seemed like a pretty good number, let's go with that. And that's honestly sometimes the most frustrating thing, because you could apply some data to it. So it's a very long answer for a very short question, and I think I spent like an hour talking to that presentation, but it took me a good 20 hours to put together. It really depends on the nature of the market and the nature of your business model. But by and large, startups spend a lot more in their early years on marketing versus larger companies tend to stick around 5 to 12%, depending on the business model.
And maybe we'll wrap up with this one. Anybody feel free to weigh in. Katie in Chicago is asking, where is digital intelligence going? What will be the next big trend in online marketing? So I feel like that's kind of two questions, Katie, but I know one of you guys will be able to tie those two together.
Chloe, go for it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think with digital intelligence, I think that's even really interesting, coining it as a term. So I can sort of talk about that, particularly like what is digital intelligence and what do we mean? And in terms of like the future of it, I think, I sort of said it earlier, like I think a lot of like what we do in business and in consumer as well is that a lot of stuff that we used to do offline is always going to be now happening more so online. And I see that that is only going to accelerate more and more. But I do think that with digital intelligence and having data to be able to back up is really one of the fundamentals of why we need to be really literate and what we're trying to achieve with our marketing spend, for example, because I think no longer do you need to put the finger in the air. If you have the mechanics in and understand your competitors, your market, and your audience combined, then you really are, on the path to growth. I think being able to spin these all three at the same time, I think that's where being literate in digital and understanding those signals and what they actually mean and being able to synthesize them also along with other tools that you're using. I think that's part of it. So I think digital intelligence in terms of where it's going is like, I mean, without it, you're kind of a bit blind, you're a bit lost, and it helps guide you to where you need to be.
Cool. Can I piggyback on that? Do we have like a couple of, okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I've worked with a couple of hyper personalization tools as somebody that just wanted to play with it, and also, yeah, clients. And that space is super fascinating. It's like one of my favorite tools that sprang up a few years ago was this company called Persado. I don't know why, like I watch too many like YouTube things where I'm not sponsored by them. Like, of course I'm not sponsored by them. But they have this really amazing tool that they're basically using AI to do A/B testing, but at an infinite level. And so the little things that they're able to pull from either what they've garnered from the ad that you've converted into their platform with, or just some of the behavior on the website, or where they assume that you're from, makes the experience so much more interesting because they can hyper personalize everything to the way that everybody else before you has reacted, which changes the entire ball game. So everything's tailored to you. It's like Minority Report, where you walk into a store and you're immediately being spoken to by that digital version. It's like, how are those pants treating you? That stuff's coming, if not already here. And I'm using it in outbound emails. So I think that, along with there's less creativity because computers can do it. So I can't think of any other name, and I don't really support the guys, but there's a lot of lifetime deals out there. So if you go to like appsumo.com, you can find tons of AI writers for $49. And many of them do ads for basically nothing, which means, hey, I'm out of a job. And the ads actually aren't bad. And so if you're doing that, mixing that with some tool that integrates with some type of image recognition software, then it's creating all of your ads for you. So therefore, we're out of the job again. I just think it's so fascinating that those that think that they're going to be doing this kind of manual stuff from now on into the future, like they are so mistaken because stuff just keeps moving faster. The way to be bulletproof is to figure out how to integrate and figure out how to use these things so that you're not, you are future-proofing yourself. You're not putting yourself at an endpoint where it's like, look, we don't need you to write anymore. I did a presentation on basically why AI is breaking the internet with GPT-3, which is super interesting. And people were getting really upset. They're like, but I'm a good writer. And it's like, and I'm sure you are. But the reality is, in a long enough time span, there's going to be a much lower cost in order for us to optimize a bot that can do everything that you think you can do, but better. And I think
but think of all the extra time you can use.
There you go.
That's the good thing, right?
This is very true. I don't know. You can tell I get jazzed up about this stuff, but
Yeah.
I think it'll be an interesting space in the future. And I do think that those that want to, play with these tools and find out what it actually does and be some of the first movers, those are the people that are going to win. I just think overall it could go no other way.
That's a great point. And I think actually a really great point to end on even, hope, a little bit of optimism. So Taylor, Chloe, thanks again for this great content and answering all the questions from our audience. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. It's been a great session. I've learned a lot as well. So it's great. Win-win for me.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a ton of fun. I'm really glad to kind of get back into these things. So this is cool.
Absolutely. Oh, and before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you all what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for our upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. And make sure to subscribe to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast at emarketer.com/podcast, where you might even catch me as a guest on occasion. And finally, please make sure to check out our newsletters. Keep an eye on your email for the link to today's recording. Thank you all for your time. And thanks again to Taylor, Chloe, and the entire team at SimilarWeb. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.